Hello everyone, this is G and I'm back with another video. So this video is probably going to be very similar in theme to the video I did a few days ago talking about the Michigan high school shooting. We have this individual here, Michael James, MJ Eddie 1984, giving his hot take opinion. And I've listened to this video, and his hot take opinion is that violent video games, in particular video games where you get to play as a criminal, right? So you're like Saints Row, GTA, stuff like that, are to blame. Now, this 2-minute clip, in my opinion, demonstrates that he knows nothing about video games or the long-standing debate over violent content in video games and artistic expression and all that. But I'm going to play this clip and try very hard to not jump in and interject. And then I'm going to give my opinion, which if you've been on Twitter, if you follow me on Twitter, you know I've retweeted this person a few times, pretty much telling them to go kick rocks. But for those who are not on Twitter, smart people, here's my opinion. And again, if you've seen my previous video or other videos I've made about this, you probably already know, but it's always good to, address it again, right? Because we do live in an age where two things exist. Video games are very popular, and sadly, school shootings have been I would say, regular thing, at least in the media, ever since, at least in my experience. This is not to say that school shootings didn't happen previously, but certainly in my experience, ever since Columbine in 1999, it seems that school shootings have sadly become a regular part, at least media-wise, of the American teenage experience, and it's something that you have to be aware of and understand that it's not a rare one-off occurrence anymore like it may have been in decades past, and there are a lot of very complex reasons for that, but I have said before, and I will say again, that none of those reasons have anything to do with media or entertainment in general. This is not to say that you should expose your children to media that you don't want them to see, right? Or media that you think is bad for them. But there's a difference between deciding what content you want your children to consume and then blaming the existence of objectionable content in general for real crimes that real people commit. Alright, so I'm going to play Mr. James' video, and then I'm going to respond to it and give my further opinions. Now, if you've ever watched my videos, at times when I try to play something, it doesn't work, so there will also be a link in the description for you to see yourself.
At what point will parents be held accountable for their children who go off and shoot people at school? You parents allow your kids to have gruesome, awful video games of people shooting each other up like it's nothing, and they shoot people on these video games and then they go on with their day, and you parents let them do it. And the video game industry ought to be held accountable as well. Why do we have games of people committing crimes? Why do we have games of people committing crimes? Would you have a video game depicting women getting raped? Why do we allow this as a society? Almost every one of these brain-dead teenagers who do this are infatuated with video games and violent video games, and yet we continue allowing them to have these games. And these parents should be held accountable, because most of these games cannot be purchased unless you're of a certain age. You parents who buy these games for your kids should be ashamed of yourself. And if those parents of this kid who bought him this game or some games, there should be charges brought against them. Why do we as a society continue to allow this? This stuff didn't happen before these stupid video games, and these kids sit around all day playing violent video games, and we wonder why things like this continue to happen. When will this change? And the video game industry should be held accountable too. They should be sued for everything they're worth. It's time to end this now.
So there's his response. All right, there's his 2-minute rant. Now here's my response. You, Mr. James, know nothing about nothing, so shut the hell up. That's the simplest way of putting it, but I'm going to try to do a bit more than just be rude to an individual who doesn't know a damn thing about video games. So let me try to educate you, Mr. MJ Eddie 1984. Because, see, I'm an 85 baby, so you and I are very close in age, right? Assuming that 1984 is his birth year. And I've grown up playing video games of all types, but yes, in particular, violent video games. Most of the media I grew up with was very competitive and violent in nature. So let's address the most obvious thing. This is an erroneous argument. Violent video games did not create violent people. Right? You can take a song like Jeremy by Pearl Jam, which is about a child uh, who ends up shooting himself uh, in front of his classmates. The song clearly points out that he's being bullied in school and he already has dark tendencies. Right? It's literally said in the beginning of the song, right? At home drawing pictures on mountaintops with him on top, lemon yellow sun, arms raised in a V, and the dead lay in pools of maroon below. So you already have a child who's disturbed in some fashion, right? Doesn't mention video games or anything, right? But the kid is already disturbed because he's expressing violent fantasies, right? So there's that. Keep in mind, Jeremy is about a real incident where a child killed himself in front of his classmates because of the bullying, right? So it's inspired by a real life event. And keep in mind, that song came out in the early 90s, so violent video games were not as popular or prevalent as they are now. Your biggest one probably would have been Mortal Kombat 2, right? But those games were not as widely available as Mr. James maybe thinks they were. Because, see, video games are a very expensive hobby, right? They're a very expensive hobby, especially if you're buying consoles that cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and then you're buying video games that cost between $40 and $60, depending on the title and depending on when you are purchasing it. The thing that Mr. James may also want to know is that the majority of video games that have ever been made, right, are actually not violent. The ones that get all the attention, the AAA titles, are violent, or they tend to be violent. But not every game is violent. A parent does not have to expose their child to violent video games. There are plenty of video games that are not violent. Nintendo has long made their name, their brand, on providing fairly child-friendly, family-friendly entertainment. The most popular, well-known video game of all time, certainly the most iconic one of all time in the modern day, is Super Mario Brothers. That's not a violent game. And even if you want to bring it up to the modern day, there are games like Fortnite, there are games like Overwatch, there are Super Smash Brothers, which take genres that are typically associated with graphic violence, like fighting games or first-person shooters, and make them a bit lighter, right, and a bit more accessible to people who maybe don't like the graphic content of Mortal Kombat or Doom or Halo or Call of Duty or what have you. So there are plenty of games, if you just look. We do have this thing these days called the internet, where there is no violence. There are games like Animal Crossing, there are games like The Sims, there are various puzzle games. The majority of video games are actually made with a T rating, meaning that, right, they're not as violent as say Doom, but they're not super squeaky clean uh, either, right? But here's the thing: his argument of violent video games are the problem. You can make this argument against literally any form of entertainment that has ever featured violence. You can make this argument. You could say it's the violent movies. You can say it's the violent cartoons. You can say it's the violent anime. You can say it's the violent music. You can say it's the violent language, right? You can say that it's combat sports like MMA or boxing or pro wrestling, which used to get a lot of blame in the 1990s because of the popularity of the Attitude Era. You could say that it's sports like football, which keep in mind, football players actually do get brain damage at times, CTE, right? But nobody wants to talk about that because football is an American pastime and it's seen as a sport, right? Whereas video games are not quite at that level. But my point is that you could take any form of entertainment that has violence as a focus, right? Comic books, for example, TV shows, anything, or anything that has ever featured violence prominently, and blame that. The fact of the thing is that if you look to the media, number one, if you're looking to the media for good, clean, moral content, you are looking in the wrong place. The media is secular, right? That's what you're going to find there. Secular entertainment. Entertainment to appeal to the masses. It doesn't matter what medium, doesn't matter what form, right? Doesn't matter whether it's music, whether it's sports, whether it's video games, whether it's movies, TV shows, Netflix, or anything else. It's going to appeal to the base senses because they need people to watch it. You don't have to watch it, right? But if you're looking to media to produce entertainment that is not objectionable to you, then you are looking in the wrong place. You need to look elsewhere. But more importantly, the media is not responsible for raising a child. That is the responsibility of the parent. Now, should a parent who knows that their kid maybe is not mentally well, right? Maybe they notice that the kid has a fascination with violence that is unhealthy. Should you let a child like that play a violent video game? No, you shouldn't. And yes, that can be blamed for the parents can be blamed in that situation. But the fact of the matter is that the entertainment industry, whatever part you want to look at it from, is not responsible for raising kids. That is for parents to do. The thing is that if you're talking about real world violence, which we're talking about here, right? This is the Michigan high school shooting. What needs to be addressed are things like the neighborhood the person grows up in, their experiences at home and outside of the home, right? Things like bullying, right? Nobody wants to talk about that. If people want to be like Mr. James here and go, it's the violent video games, it's the violent content in the media. Nobody even wants to talk about the violence the person literally grows up around, whether they're being bullied, whether they're being abused at home, or they live in a violent neighborhood, or anything else. It's always blame the video games, blame the media, blame the media, blame the media, because we can't stand to look at ourselves and blame ourselves for failing our children. That's what this is really about. And see, here's the thing. I was that kid 20 years ago who had an unhappy family life, who grew up in a bad neighborhood, who got picked on in school, and believe me when I tell you, I was on the brink. I was either going to hurt others or I was going to hurt myself. I was fortunate enough. I was fortunate enough to have a few people in my life, in particular my best friend at the time, to help talk me off the ledge. And while our friendship sadly would fall apart as we moved into adulthood, his friendship is probably why I didn't go completely off the rails. Because I had someone in my life who was a lot like me in many ways. So we were able to support each other and get each other through that. But if I didn't have that, who knows what I would have done to myself or others. That's the part that people like Mr. James don't want to talk about. They don't want to talk about the inner or outer life of the kids who sadly go on to do these things, right? They want to look after the fact and blame everything else but they don't want to actually examine what drives a person to do such a thing. What brings a person to that point, right? You want to absolve the perpetrator of any responsibility. So you take all of the guilt and the responsibility and you put it on the entertainment industry by saying they have to do better. But nobody wants to look at society and go, we have to do better. We have to deal with things like bullying, or now these days, especially with COVID, cyberbullying. We don't want to talk about those things. He goes on for 2 damn minutes, doesn't mention one thing about bullying, cyberbullying, schools getting involved and actually taking some sort of action against students who bully others. Because believe me, I went through that every single year of school up until college, and never, ever, 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 ever did the school administrations. And believe me, I met with principals. We wrote. I literally had a meeting. Me and my mother had a meeting with the literal head of the Board of Education, right, in like the late 90s, early 2000s, about what was going on. We reached out to everybody. We wrote letters. Nothing was ever done. The only thing that was ever done was that I got switched to a different school that was further out away from home. And guess what? I got bullied there too. That is what needs to be addressed, right? Why the teachers don't do anything, or aren't allowed to do anything. Why school administrators sit by and do nothing when parents notify them, tell them my kid is being abused in school, verbally abused, picked on, physically abused, whatever it is, right? That's what we need to address. We need to address the mental issues that come up from bullying, like depression, like violent fantasies of getting back at the people who hurt you, right? We need to look at ourselves as a society and ask why we are failing our children, why we are leaving them in this jungle to fend for themselves and not helping them when they ask for help. But no one ever wants to look at those things because those are the hard questions that don't have easy answers because the finger points back at you and nobody likes that. Nobody likes being held responsible. But that is the problem. That's the problem. The real world issues that drive a person to this point. It's not the video games. I played violent video games growing up. I played Street Fighter, I played Mortal Kombat, I played Tekken, I played Metal Gear Solid, I played GTA 3, Vice City, San Andreas. If anything, in a weird paradoxical way, those games gave me an outlet for the more violent impulses and tendencies I was struggling with. It allowed me to sort of enact the violence that I wanted to or desired to in a safe manner where I wasn't actually hurting people. It allowed me to de-stress. It allowed me to get that pent up anger and aggression out so that when I came back to school the next day, right, I was in a slightly better place. What Mr. James here probably doesn't realize is that for all of the school shootings and all of the violence that erroneously gets blamed on video games, nobody ever wants to talk about how video games help people on the brink, right? Who are teetering between two extreme options, which are not good. Hurting yourself isn't good. Hurting others isn't good. And how it gives them that third option, gives them that outlet where they can get their feelings out, get their emotions out, get their aggressions out in a safe way that does not put them at risk and doesn't put others at risk. Video games have probably saved more lives, not just in America, but in other countries across the world because it's an international hobby, sir. Maybe you don't know that. Right? But they probably saved more lives than he'll ever know. But as you can see from his 2 minute rant, his mind is already made up about what the who to blame is, right? Right? Who is really responsible? he's wrong in my personal opinion, but his mind's already made up. But yeah, again, we need to address this because no kid should have to go to school wondering if their classmate has a gun or a knife on them and is going to turn it on them. But no kid should have to ever feel like they have to go to school with a knife or a gun just to protect themselves, right? And no kid should have to go to school or these days go on Zoom for their classes and, know that they're at some point in the day going to be bullied and made fun of or beat up or picked on or anything like this, right? So maybe we should be more proactive in trying to address the actual real world issues that cause things like school shootings and workplace shootings and mass shootings. Maybe we should do our best to try to identify those causes and uh, 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 stem what's I'm looking nip the issue in the bud. Is the term I'm looking for before it gets to that point of no return. Instead of looking at Grand Theft Auto and going, "You're to blame," because guess what? Rockstar doesn't give a damn. Rockstar and Take Two Interactive are going to laugh at you. But the children who get hurt in these situations, and even the children who commit these crimes, their lives are forever altered. Your ranting and raving about violent video games is not going to change a damn thing about the video game industry. It's got much more important things to worry about, with its own very real world issues about company culture and sexual harassment and all this other stuff. They ain't going to listen to you. You want to save a life? You want to help someone? I don't know if you have kids, sir, but maybe try to be a positive mentor to one. You'll impact lives much more effectively that way than yelling into the void that is Twitter about how violent video games are the problem. Be the good you want to see in the world. But anyway, that's the video. Please let me know what you think, and I will see you all in the next one. Have a good day and night wherever you are. Bye.